So I saw Joker Folly I Do, and I will say right from the get-go, this film is going to be divisive no matter what argument you want to make for it. People are either going to go in expecting to see more of the same Joaquin Phoenix Joker we saw in the third act of the first film, the one that, goes up on the stage on Murray Franklin's show and kill him on live television, start like a whole mass riot. And the film ends with him in the institute at the end of the first movie laughing with himself with the imagined, like, the flashback image of Thomas and Martha Wayne getting killed and Bruce Wayne as a little boy, the iconic shot we all know from the comics and almost every origin tale of Batman is him as a little boy helplessly watching as his family was killed before his eyes, and we know that transpires the origin of Batman, which, everyone may have had big ideas of there possibly being a Batman, which, I think it was just more like if there was to be a sequel, everyone had high expectations because I think personally Joaquin Phoenix is the second best Joker we've had in the live action. I'm not saying he could be the greatest. Like, obviously, I think Heath Ledger is still an iconic Joker, but there's a difference between Joaquin Phoenix and Heath Ledger's Joker, as well as Jack Nicholson, Jared Leto, whatever you think of these Jokers, everyone has a Joker they like, or a Batman they prefer over the other, whether it's comic book, television, you name it. Everyone's got an opinion on which is like, what they want. And it's cool, like, to have, your own personal connection with it, but I think that's also becomes a detriment when a film does very successful, but what made it successful was the fact that it was more of a character piece than any real basis on any IP. I hear, a lot mention that the first Joker is a blatant copy of Taxi Driver, which is a fair criticism, I think, because yeah, you can see a lot of the Taxi Driver influence, a lot of Scorsese work definitely aspired the first Joker movie, and maybe there's other influences too, not just to say it's solely a Scorsese, parody, because I personally still very much enjoyed the Joker movie just because I like this version of like a real grounded focus on a character who could be a Joker. And not to say he's like supposed to be the canon Joker. I think that's one thing I think a lot of people are gonna keep arguing about is the fact that they supposedly didn't base it on any comic book source, which I think would have been a detriment either way. I think this is not an adaptation of any sort of story about Joker from the comics. This is a film in which the director wanted to try to express a different story or idea with a established character, which might have been a detriment, but then again, no one would have given a shit because today's Hollywood solely determines that we need more superhero or established IP characters. We can't have like, solely an original piece as a character study of a mentally ill loner who eventually goes on television and kills somebody unless it's Joker and he dresses like with a clown in the face. And I think that is what will always be the grandest weakness, or the thing that everyone's going to point out, is that Joaquin Phoenix character, which I think we need to separate him from Joker and solely refer to the character as Arthur Fleck. Arthur Fleck is not the clown prince of crime from the Batman comics or any pre-established Batman IP. This is a man who is solely a mentally ill loner who throughout his entire life has been manipulated and beaten down by people who were supposed to protect him, systems that were meant to protect him and give him the help he needed, especially after as you know in the first movie, he found out at a young age that his mom enabled him to be abused by lovers who supposedly inflicted this brain damage onto him and may have been a developing factor of why Arthur Fleck has become the way he is, why he has such a grandiose and active fantasy world, because the world he lives in has ruptured him. It's harmed him. He's reverted into a shell, which I think is a factor for a lot of people who understand what PTSD or suffering with some sort of illness can do to you. I think that's what really resonated with me when I first saw the Joker, because when I saw the Joker, I felt everything Arthur felt. I know that might be, kind of pathetic to some, but I would just be honest, I empathize with the monster, even if he is a monster. Like, I'm not saying I condone what he did, but then again, it's a movie, though. I can witness certain things in a movie because I don't know, maybe it's like sensationalism, I don't fucking know. But I do, when you see a movie of a guy getting his shit, constantly getting kicked around and treated like shit his whole life, eventually you do kind of want the guy to, like, get a fucking spine and, like, stand up for himself. And that's what's interesting about films and story and art, is that we can empathize with characters who would normally be considered villains or people in our society that we would condemn and sentence to death and hell and all sorts of misery without even fully understanding who they are. But because of the movie, we did understand who Arthur Fleck was. We saw his journey into becoming supposedly the icon Joker. But what's interesting about Todd Phillips' film of the first movie is that Arthur never had, like, some compulsive need to become, like, a criminal mastermind. In fact, the only reason why Arthur slowly became the Joker was because of a lot of external factors that, like, fundamentally, like, I'm sorry if I'm stammering, this is kind of a riff, but what he's gone throughout the first part of the movie was just like, we see this guy get kicked around by some kids just by, doing his job. He dresses like a clown, which, that's part of the whole Joker gimmick. But view this as just Arthur Fleck, not solely him being Joker. This is Arthur Fleck's story. This is a man who has, with little limited skill set he has, was actively trying to be a functional member of society. But every time he tried, he got shitted on. He got ripped apart. He got judged and ridiculed for his behavior. His mother was almost like another factor in his development. And I'm sorry, this is becoming like, me rehashing the first movie, but I think this has to be kind of established before I even really talk about, the follow-up film, which everyone's universally gonna, bash and hate. And, I understand, like, everyone's got a right to, have an opinion. I just think some of the criticisms, and, some of it can be valid. I'm not saying, like, this, I've only seen the film once, and I'm sure most of you have only seen it once, and some people might not see it now, period, because they're hearing the word on the internet that it's a shit film. But I think that's a very insincere way to start the conversation about a movie if we are going to conversate about what this movie is. But I think it's important that we keep in mind of, the first movie and really talk about the fundamentals of it. And I don't think I'll be able to get at all the nuances into this. But what I gathered from the Joker movie is just the first movie is that this is a story of Arthur Fleck. He's a very reserved, shelved in person. He doesn't have many people to cling on to. He has a mother, but it's more like his mother now depends on him more than he depends on her. But he's kind of in this toxic love relationship with her, like, where this is the only source of love he's ever been able to have in his life. And if we all remember the first movie, his mother was a very disturbed woman. She suffered with the same sorts of fantasy world elements. I know there's some theories on whether or not Thomas Wayne was truly Arthur's father, with Thomas truly suppressed the story about Arthur's origin to preserve the Wayne's name and whatnot, but I'd like to believe that it truly was a delusion of his own mother, who truly convinced herself that this son is Thomas Wayne's son, even though she adopted him. She adopted him because she created a delusion in which she was in love with Thomas Wayne and Thomas Wayne was in love with her. And when he eventually had to fire her, she continued to believe that Arthur is not Bruce Wayne's, Thomas Wayne's father or son. And also, but then again, she also kept this detail hidden from Arthur. She never really encouraged this fantasy until the first part of the movie. But that's when Arthur started to kind of question who he is, and then also like the external factors of his work life. The fact that his co-workers, Randall, who we should keep mention of Randall in the first movie if we're going to talk about the second movie, because that name gets mentioned. Randall was an old co-worker of Arthur's when he was working at, I think it was called Bozo's or some place. It was a clown kind of, a clown union, I believe. But when Arthur got beat up by the kids in the opening of the film, and after his, we got introduced to his life of him going to therapy and given, getting introduced to his laugh and what it represents. His laugh is almost like a reaction to stressful situations. A real life, I don't know how common it is, but I remember seeing clips after the first movie came out of supposedly this condition Arthur has is not too different from other phenomena, like other tics and behaviors that certain people with PTSD or certain conditions exhibit, like, twitching, all sorts of compulsive urges or habits that the person may not have real control over. It's just a spasm to them. And I think it was such a unique way of having him be, this laugh is almost as if it's a way for him to, to cover for his, for whatever traumas he's trying so hard to sort out or repress to his shadow, which is another discussion about Joker that I remember investing myself in, is the shadow archetype. If there is within a person a hidden dark version of their own personality that we as a society are told to repress, because the social conscience determines that we must all behave according to certain laws and just common rule sets among every society. And I'm sorry if I keep saying society. I'm not trying to say it and edgy, we live in a society cringe shit. I'm just saying we all live in a society. We all live in a social environment. Even if someone who is as lonely as Arthur, he himself has to abide by these rules. Even if the rules have flaws or a lot of moral ambiguity or just injustice, period. Gotham, in the movies and even in any adaptation of Batman's universe, Gotham has always been a city of injustice until Batman arrives. And this is a universe in which Batman isn't here to come clean out the dirty snakes and encourage spark a flame of hope and redemption for Gotham. Gotham is in its own hell in the first film. It's littered in garbage, trash. And the people who live in the lower class, which is another argument I'm sure a lot of people are gonna hate, is they're getting tired of the lower class angle, or the fact that it's a simple poor versus rich story. And I don't even think the film is about that. But I think the movie addresses that these are the arguments people are gonna have, and in the middle are the people like Arthur. And these are people who are, unfortunately, there are real world examples of an Arthur Fleck. We hear this on the news in the United States every day or every odd day. It's almost it's too much to keep all straight, but we hear a lot of stories about people killing children, getting killed in schools, all sorts of horrible things, presidential assassination attempts. We are living in we're not living in a too off different future of what Arthur came from. And I think that, I keep saying this, we got to separate the fact that Arthur and the Joker are two different things. They're almost not even the same. Or they are, but what Joker is in the accordance of Todd Phillips' universe is nothing but what the narrative in which the society is created around Arthur. No one truly understood who Arthur was. Arthur was invisible until he became Joker. When he I was focusing on before I went on a ramble. I apologize. I don't know how much I'll edit this at all. Probably not. But we need to take note. And okay, so Arthur got attacked in the open of the film, and then when after the attack, he comes to work in a later scene. And when he's at the scene, Randall, a coworker of his, a bully, which whether or not to say Randall's a bully, because then it goes into my own argument of who are we to say if Randall truly deserves. We're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm sorry. But if you know the movie, you know kind of what's going to happen to Randall. But Randall, after Arthur gets attacked, Randall, says, hey, I heard you got jumped by some kids, calls them fucking savages or whatever. And then Arthur kind of says, they're just kids. But Randall, nonetheless, even though Randall supposedly expressed that he always had some sort of disposition towards Arthur, or at least the relationship which he's kind of created between him and Arthur is one-sided, in which Arthur doesn't really care for Randall. Randall doesn't give a fuck about Arthur, but they have to work together. But either way, Randall gives Arthur a pistol. And now it comes into question, how guilty is Randall for this? I believe it's technically illegal for you to give someone your gun without even having much of a permit, especially since if Todd Phillips is trying to pass New York as Gotham, then according to New York law, which I don't know if to change, but I don't think you're allowed to just have a fucking pistol. Anyway, I'm sorry, this point's stupid to be highlighting. That's just me. But anyways, Arthur gets a gun, and then it starts corrupting, allowing Arthur to kind of start manifesting, or at least the shadow within him starting to kind of reveal itself. We start seeing Arthur playing with the gun, toying with it. It's starting to give him a sense of power, something which Arthur has never really came close to feeling his whole life. His whole life, supposedly, he never knew if he truly existed. But now he's got something, an instrument of sort, which now will exasperate. Oh, God, I'm trying to use my fancy dollar words, but I'm just gonna butcher it. But we start seeing that Arthur's fantasy world is starting to be indoctrinated by the violent sensation that can manifest with an individual like Arthur. So when Arthur gets his gun, this movie goes on a little bit, but he eventually gets on the train after getting fired from his work because while he was performing, the gun slid out of his pocket and his boss found out. And this becomes a point where we can really determine, at least the audience will judge, that Randall is a piece of shit. But when Arthur's brought a gun to the hospital, which he shouldn't, we can all agree, he probably shouldn't have brought a gun, but when you're a man like Arthur, who's never even really been taught what is appropriate and what's not appropriate, maybe having a gun to him felt well, if Randall's gave me a gun, it must be okay for me to have a gun. And fuck, man, he got attacked by some kids. Okay, I'm kidding. I'm trying to at least be a little sensible about some humor here, so it's not just me ranting about the movie or people's opinions of it. But we all know that after he gets fired, Randall supposedly told his boss that he never gave Arthur the gun, but Arthur was given the gun. But then later on, when he's on the train, Arthur witnesses of a woman being harassed by 3 drunken men. These people become very important for, both for the movie of Joker 2019 and Joker Folie à Deux. Is that these 3 drunken Wall Street guys were harassing this woman. The woman leaves, but because of the situation in which Arthur was forced to witness, and because of just the stress of his day and what's going on internally for him, Arthur starts compulsively laughing, as he normally did. This is supposedly his underlying condition, which we can talk about what that laugh really is, but right now let's just call it for what we as the audience, when we first saw the film, could understand what it was. Is that Arthur was laughing, and due to his condition could not he couldn't make himself stop. And so these Wall Street guys start cornering in on him and kind of start teasing him. And then before he knows it, Arthur tries to bring his card out. He had a card that said, like, please excuse my laugh, it's part of my condition. And so Arthur continues laughing. He tries to give the card, but they don't care. These guys just wanted to, bully him. They see this guy wearing a clown makeup laughing at them. They start swarming in on him. And before you know it, Arthur's getting beaten down and laughed at. And before anyone even knows, the biggest moment of that movie at the moment, Arthur retaliates. He shoots these men in self-defense. And then he kills the third guy very cold-bloodedly. The first two, you can say, was just impulse. He was just defending himself. But the third kill was, like, first degree. But when Arthur shoots and kills these men, later on, a witness saw Arthur in his makeup and began the creation of Joker. Now, I know some people might say, wow, that was a big let up just for that. But anyways, the narrative amongst the newspapers and TV clips we see of the movie, it begins to create that the Joker, or the killer clown, I believe they call him initially. He's not officially Joker, but he's referred as the killer clown, which starts creating kind of like a social movement, or kind of like a folk hero for the unprivileged, the people like Arthur who truly understand what he's feeling. To them, what Arthur did, him killing those Wall Street guys, was just Arthur doing their work, or doing what was like what they wish someone would do, to act out against this society, against the upper class. So he becomes like a lower class folk hero, or like, I don't even want to say it's solely a lower class, but the film does depict it as if a large part of like the lower end parts of Gotham actually start kind of siding with the clown killer. And when after Arthur killed those three men, keep in mind, we all understand that Arthur killed those people initially out of self-defense. It was not like, it wasn't like he went on that train and was like stalking these guys deliberately to kill them. At least in my interpretation of the film, I think this was truly an impulsive slaying of two men. And the third guy, you can say, was still kind of